Making a budget is probably the most important thing that governments do. Of course, governments do a lot of things, but without a budget, they can't really get much of anything done. A budget is a plan for how money is going to come in and how money is going to get spent. And pretty much everything a government does requires money. Not quite everything, but almost everything. So having this kind of plan is really, really important for governments to do. Governments, it requires more than one person to make a budget. So what you need to know about government budgets is it requires many groups getting involved. It requires multiple votes. It requires multiple levels of government planning, working together. They only have to do this one time per year, but it usually takes a few months for that to happen. And we'll get into details later about when exactly that happens and so on. But those are some of the things some of the basics that you should know about government budgets. Come back to balanced budget later, but two key words are revenue and expenses. Let's start with the good news. That's the revenue. That's the money coming in. Revenue is the fancy term for money that the government is getting. Usually, most of that, well, really always, most of that money comes from taxes. We'll have a separate topic, separate video and things about taxes. But right now, you just need to know revenue for a budget is the expected amount of money that's going to come in for the next year. So they have to kind of make a guess. The word they often use is projected. They're kind of like, imagine like a projector, like putting like something up ahead in front. It's how much they're planning to get. Expenses is the other side, right? That's how much they're spending out. Expenses, spend. So that's how much they're expecting that they'll have to spend. And here's maybe the most complicated part here. There are really, let's try to break it down. There are really two kinds of expenses. One is called mandatory expenses. Those are required. They're going to have to pay that out whether they like it or not. Some examples are salaries, right? They've made contracts with all the people that are hired by the government. You got to pay those people or else they're going to take you to court, for example. So things like that are things that are mandatory expenses. The other category, we'll use a few words for this. Discretionary is one way that it's called. We could call it like optional kinds of expenses. What would be an optional? Why would you choose to spend money? Well, it's some things that you have like a choice of how much to spend. So for like a city, for example, an optional discretionary expense is getting like sand and salt for like the plow trucks for the winter. They can choose how much exactly they would have to buy. There's no required amount of sand and salt that they'd have to get for the trucks. So maybe they could decide to do a little bit less or a little bit more. That would be an example of discretionary or optional kind of expense. So going over to the other side, a balanced budget. A balance is kind of like what it sounds like. The revenue and the expenses are the same. Remember, they're planning a year ahead of time. So a balanced budget is a plan. It's projected that the amount that they're going to get in, mostly from taxes, and the amount they're going to spend out would be the same. And a lot of states have a rule about this, and every town, at least in Massachusetts, has a rule they have to have a balanced budget. The US government, not so much. The US government almost never has a balanced budget, almost always spends more than it brings in. But we'll get into that with another video later on. I think that pretty much covers all the basics here. We will be looking more closely at specific budgets later on, but this should do it for now.